All right, well, thank you very much for having me here. I'm going a little casual here today because we were at a parade this morning in Wyandotte County, and I very much appreciate the fact that you're having your convention about 4 blocks from where I live. So when I got the invitation, I knew that I couldn't say no because you're very close by. But you know, I used to be a part of this organization just a few years ago. And it's really wonderful to be here with you, and I'm glad that you are taking an active role in the Kansas Young Democrats. And it is a wonderful opportunity for you to get involved in politics, to get involved in campaigns. I took this opportunity about 20 years ago to get to know some people who worked for a guy named Jim Slattery back then. Some of you may know Jim Slattery, and he was a member of Congress. And I went to work in an internship for him, and he later decided to run for governor, and I got the opportunity to work on his campaign. Unfortunately, that campaign was not successful. It wasn't even close to being successful, but it was a great experience for me. And I met so many people who I have continued to have friendships with, and I have worked with on numerous different Democratic campaigns over the years. So I take full advantage of this, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing because 20 years from now, somebody here in this room might be running for governor, and I hope that one of you are. Let me talk just a little bit about what's going on in our campaign and what's going on really in Kansas. And I'm going to rewind just a little bit, and I know that when I'm rewinding, it may be back to times when some of you were in grade school or things like that, but maybe they're things that your parents were talking about. This is my 12th year in the legislature. I came into office in 2003. And when I came into office, there was a wave of pro-public education legislators, Democrats and Republicans. Probably the last time that we've had a big election where we had sent a number of really pro-public education people to the state capitol. And one of the first things that I did was go across the aisle to meet Republicans. I'm proud to be a Democrat, no doubt about that. But I tell you, I don't wear my partisanship on my sleeve. I tend to look at people as not necessarily Democrats or Republicans, but are they folks who share my values, share my interests, share my concerns, and are they people that I can work with? And so I went across the aisle and I started meeting the Republicans and trying to figure out who is interested in the same things that I'm interested in. And I found a lot of people who shared the same concerns that I had. And we immediately began working together as a coalition. And we actually proposed our own alternative state budget that year. 16 freshmen, Democrats and Republicans. We were called the Sweet 16. And we hung out together. We had press conferences together. We didn't work like people work right now, and where Democrats and Republicans, and even Republicans and Republicans are at each other's throats. We worked together just like normal people would and trying to get things done. Now, we weren't successful, but because as new legislators, the veterans weren't going to let us necessarily have our way. But what we did was we set the stage for a coalition that really got things done over the next 7 to 8 years. There was a school finance lawsuit back in 2005, just like there is now, that has worked its way through the system. And we really put together the coalition that ended that school finance lawsuit and made a historic investment at that time in our public schools. We worked together to make some very strategic funding initiatives at our state universities. The National Cancer Institute designation that the KU School of Medicine now has, we put the seed money into the budget to help make that possible. And this is going to be a great thing, not just for KU, not for Kansas City, but truly for all the people of Kansas. I would imagine that all of us in this room have some connection to cancer, whether it's something that you have had yourself, a parent, or some other relative or friend has had. No longer will people have to go to MD Anderson in Houston or Mayo's in Minnesota to receive the very best, the latest and greatest cancer treatment. They will be able to do that right here in Kansas. And they don't necessarily have to go just to Kansas City to do it, because they are working with hospitals and healthcare providers all across the state. For you K-Staters, you know about NBAF, and you know what a huge driver that is going to be for the economy in the Manhattan Junction City corridor. Well, during this time, we put down the seed money to help make NBAF possible, and we were able, working together as Democrats and Republicans, to win that process in a very competitive process, and Kansas is going to benefit greatly from that. We also made some strategic initiatives in our schools of engineering. If you go out here and you look across the street, you're going to see a whole lot of construction that's going on. That is going on as a result of the good things that we did at the legislature, because we have to generate more engineers out of KU, K-State, and Wichita State. Just yesterday I was in Wichita at the National Aviation Training Center. In Wichita, there are more engineers per capita than every other city in the country, except for 2 places. If you want to be an engineer, the opportunities abound in Wichita, Kansas. And we've got to grow more engineers here. And if we do that, we're going to be able to meet the needs of industry, and we're going to be able to attract more industry to our state. We also passed a comprehensive transportation plan. We have a great infrastructure in Kansas, and we have a lot of it. It costs money to maintain it. And if we're going to grow communities, if we're going to be able to really have meaningful economic development, we have to have a robust transportation program. This transportation program will create 175,000 jobs over the life of the plan. And unfortunately, a lot of money has been taken out of this plan to subsidize Governor Brownback's tax plan. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second here. But this is the largest jobs program that the state legislature has ever enacted. We also created the Kansas Bioscience Authority, adding a whole new component to our state's economy. 5 years ago, Kansas was a place that was talked about across the country as a leader in creating biosciences and life sciences jobs. You know, when if you are interested in science and you want to go work in that field, if you've been graduating from a Kansas university, oftentimes you've got to leave the state to go find a job. We are providing a new opportunity for people that are graduating from college and that are interested in working in that sector. But all of these good things were done with Democrats and Republicans working together, and governors who understood how to bring people together. Kathleen Sebelius and Mark Parkinson, and Bill Graves was able to do it before them. But all of this changed in 2010 with the election of Sam Brownback. You know, after the election, I called then Senator Brownback and congratulated him and told him that I stood ready to work with him. I knew we were going to disagree on a lot of things, but I would try to find common ground with him whenever I possibly could. And shortly after that, I was invited to a meeting at the Capitol. It was before he had been sworn into office. And I went to that meeting, and it was the bipartisan legislative leaders. We knew each other well because we'd been meeting a lot over the past number of years. And when that meeting started, we exchanged pleasantries, exchanged phone numbers, and a photographer came into the room shortly after that. And not at that time did I realize this, but later on I realized that this was bipartisanship for Sam Brownback, a photo op. That group hasn't gotten together to meet a single time since that meeting. Sam Brownback doesn't know how to work with Democrats. He doesn't even know how to work with his own party, oftentimes. And look what has happened. So, when he was sworn into office, he came to the legislature and delivered his very first State of the State address. And in that address, he said, public education is to Kansas what the national defense is to the federal government. I thought about that. I agree. Makes sense. It is that important to our state. But the very next day, Governor Brownback issued his first state budget. And it provided for the largest cut to public school funding in state history. 4 months later, he signed those cuts into law. And when he signed them into law, he said something very interesting. He said it was a victory for Kansas. Think about that for just a second. Historic cuts to public education, a victory. But we've seen the consequences of this. Larger class sizes, teacher layoffs, teachers leaving this profession. Test scores dropped for the first time in 2012 in a decade, and they dropped again in 2013. I don't know we have too many parents here, but I know we got Vanessa Sandburn, who's one of our school board members, and she knows this very well because she's a parent and a school board member. There is now a fee for just about everything if you have a child in public schools. And that has been the result of Sam Brownback's single largest cut to public school funding in state history. Well, his second year in office, he followed this up by proposing to completely revamp our tax system. And his original plan was so bad that it didn't even receive a hearing in the legislature. And the reason it was so bad was that it proposed to raise taxes on people who make $5,000 or less. Excuse me, $25,000 or less by 5,000%. Those aren't my numbers. Those aren't the numbers of some liberal think tank in Washington, D.C. Those are the Brownback administration's own numbers. Now think about this for a second. These are the very people who have borne the brunt of the recession, the poorest of Kansas. And he wanted to ask them to pay 5,000% more so that people who are in the top 1%, the highest income earners, could receive a tax break. That's morally wrong. Fortunately, that plan did not pass, but another plan did. And we have seen the results of that plan now for several years. What has happened is that it has blown a gigantic hole in our state's budget. The past 2 months, revenues have been $310 million below estimates. The debt that the state is in over the next 5 years is approaching $1.5 billion. You know, Governor Brownback likes to talk about creating a red state model. What he has created is a red ink model. And in addition to that, this so-called experiment that he has referred to, that he said would provide a shot of adrenaline to our economy. We would see immediate results. People would be moving to Kansas from all over the place. Jobs would be created by the thousands. Well, we are lagging behind our surrounding states and the rest of the country in almost every economic indicator. The governor's own Council of Economic Advisors just a few months ago, in their report, acknowledged that we were behind all of our surrounding states in all of these economic indicators. This experiment is not working. Think about what an experiment is. You all have been in a science class. It's trying something that's never worked before. That's what an experiment is. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's trying something that's never worked before. This trickle-down economics has been tried before. and it has never worked. And it's not working here, and it's not going to work. Now, in his third year in office, and I'll tell you what, this is the thing that really got me going and probably got me into this race, and it should get all of you going. Governor Brownback, during the end of the legislative session, was traveling around to all the state universities, and you may remember when he came to your campus. And there was some discussion in the legislature about cutting higher education. And he went around saying, higher education is so important to our state. We can't cut it. We must support higher education funding. Well, then he had an opportunity to back up his rhetoric. And what he did was, he sold all of you, our state universities, right down the river. And he signed $66 million of higher education cuts into law. In a year when all of our surrounding states increased support for state universities. And the result has been that the Board of Regents has raised tuition. And they're going to do it again. And all of this is coming on your backs, the backs of your parents, the debt that you are going to be saddled with when you leave your university. This Brownback experiment is a failure. There's no doubt about it, and Kansans get it. I have been traveling all across the state, and I can tell you that people see this for what it is, and they know that we cannot continue down this path anymore. So what do we need to do in the future? Well, what we need to do is we need to understand and recommit ourselves to the notion that strong public schools and strong universities are the very foundation of a stronger economy. People are not going to continue to live in our state or are going to come to our state if we are not supporting our public schools and our universities. We have to understand that growing the economy is not done by some ideologically driven one-size-fits-all policy. It's done by listening to people in business, to economic development professionals about what works in Kansas, and knowing that what works here in Lawrence is very different than what works in Wichita and in Hayes. It's recommitting ourselves to investing in our infrastructure and knowing that not only will that help us improve our infrastructure and our quality of life in our communities, but it also creates badly needed jobs that our state needs. And it means that we have an economic development policy that invests strategically in industries where we have assets. Wind, for instance. We are the second or the third windiest state in the country, but yet we are 9th or 10th in terms of the capacity that we are producing. If you want to build a wind turbine, there is no better place to do it than Kansas, because we are right in the middle of the wind corridor. And we have got to do much, much more to be able to see the true energy exportation potential that the state has. So we've got a lot to run on in this campaign. And I am so pleased with the reaction that we've gotten all across this state. We have a great opportunity here. I had the chance to spend a little bit of time with former Governor John Carlin. Some of you may remember him. He was governor for 2 terms back in the 1980s. And he said to me, he's now in his early 70s now, he said, you know, Paul, I've been on the ballot numerous times, and those were really important elections for me. I thought they were important elections for our state, but I have never seen a more critical election for Kansas than this election. Because if we allow Sam Brownback's experiment to go on for 4 more years, this state is going to look dramatically different than it is right now. As you know, we've been doing very well. We've been leading Governor Brownback in the early polling here. We've been ahead in 3 out of the 4 independent polls. We have a tremendous number of moderate Republicans that are coming to support this campaign. But I have to tell you, it's not going to be easy to win this race at all. there are people who have profited enormously under Sam Brownback's tenure as governor, and they are ready to spend, and they will spend a lot because they've got deep pockets to keep him in office. And a lot of people ask me, are you worried about the big money that's out there? And to tell you the truth, I'm not. I'm not worried about it, because if you look at the track record of big money the past couple of election cycles, they haven't won. The reason they haven't been winning is because if you run a well-organized, a disciplined grassroots campaign, you can defeat the big money. And that's exactly what we have to do here in Kansas. And it is going to require a monumental effort. It's going to require everybody working harder than they ever have before, talking to your friends, talking to your neighbors. It is critically important that we get more young people out to vote. I know that young people are going to gravitate to this campaign because they've got so much at stake, and you have got to help be our messengers to convince people how important it is that they turn out to vote in this election. And I think if we do all these things, we will no doubt be successful, and we can get things turned around here in Kansas. And I hope that 20 years from now, maybe when you get to come to a Young Democrats meeting, you will look back at being a part of this campaign 20 years ago, and you'll be proud that you were there. So thank you for having me, and thank you for all of you.